Thank you all for joining us this morning. Before we get started, I'd like to ask all of the Chicago Urban League board members who are in attendance today to please stand. I would ask all of you to join along with the board in a moment of silence for our board member and dear friend and colleague, Lori Healy, who passed away this past Sunday. Lori was a dear friend. She and I served together in numerous endeavors, most notably the 2016 Olympic bid for the city of Chicago, and she will be sorely missed. So once again, I would ask that you join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. I'd just like to add that we will miss Lori's presence dearly, and we send our heartfelt condolences to her friends and her family members. Now, moving on, we are so happy this morning to partner with the Win-Win team because we know that the issues we are raising over the next 2 days are critical to our city. The state of Black Chicago, like the state of our entire city, is critical. We know that there are many, many bright spots with our collective educational attainment and political achievements, but we also know that there are challenges ahead of us that we must address. That is the primary reason that we have asked you to join us here today. We have decided to focus on solutions in this edition of the State of Black Chicago, and we are highlighting solutions provided by the Chicago Urban League and solutions offered by others in the community. We are also suggesting that we can accomplish much more together and suggesting ways that that can happen. So in short, there is a role for all of us to play in addressing these challenges and the state of Black Chicago. There is one group of individuals whose work factors heavily in the state of Black Chicago. That is our elected leaders. We are fortunate to have many of them with us this morning, and we would like to ask that all elected officials please stand and be acknowledged. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome this morning our mayor, Brandon Johnson, and I would ask you all to join me in welcoming Mayor Johnson.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. Don't have me pull out my Tony Preckwinkle chops in a minute. You all gotta give me a little more energy than that. We're talking about the state of Black Chicago and building solutions to transform descendants of slaves in America. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm grateful to be with you all. Thank you to all of the elected officials that are here this morning, all of the civic leaders, business leaders, residents of this democracy. The 2025 Urban League Policy Summit is something to look forward to and something to celebrate and appreciate. The entirety of this collective response in this moment is a proud example of what it means to understand our current role. From business and civic leaders coming together and faith leaders to address the critical issues that are facing our community, that's something that is paramount to the evolution of our democracy. I do want to acknowledge, though, the Urban League team, the board, and of course the President and CEO, the Honorable Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson. It's always good to be in a room where you know at least one person understands what you're going through. You truly are a shining example of what civic organizations can do to uplift and transform our city. I'm also grateful for the Chicago Urban League's release of the 2025 State of Black Chicago report, outlining the pathway to wealth building for Black Chicagoans. Like the Urban League, my administration is committed to reducing the racial wealth gap and reversing decades of systemic racism. The State of Black Chicago report offers us a roadmap to do just that. The summit and this roadmap is an opportunity for us to define our partnerships that will ultimately fuel our progress as we put forth solutions that allow us to have focus. Focus of progress that cannot be confined to our silos. It requires government and civic organizations, businesses, philanthropists, and community, all of us to come together with a shared purpose. That is why I am appreciative that this is the DNA of who we are. We roll up our sleeves and we tackle big challenges together. That is the Chicago way. And throughout our city's history, Black Chicagoans have been building wealth in our city. Black Chicago formed and developed vibrant communities like Bronzeville and Austin. They shaped our civic life, the culture, the economy. They shaped the soul of our city. Black Chicago has unfortunately not always benefited from the contributions that they have provided in our city. But it is up to us to build a Chicago where Black Chicago feels the prosperity of our city's wealth, the wealth that we help create. It is up to us to build a more equitable Chicago where future generations of Black Chicagoans have every opportunity to launch businesses and careers and invest in our city, and they have the ability to thrive. And I hope that we leave today with new partnerships and ideas and a renewed sense of commitment to that mission to build generational wealth. Let us commit to act, to collaborate, to invest in the future that Chicago deserves. As an administration, my commitment to build more affordable homes, to expand opportunities for our young people, to make sure that there's mental and behavioral health services to help us deal with the long-lasting impact of trauma in our communities. If we do that, if we actually believe in our people enough, I know that a better, stronger, safer Chicago and a more inclusive economy can work. And despite the division that is being sown in this particular moment, the city of Chicago, we have to remain firm and committed to introducing ideas that actually work. And then finally, we can save this democracy. We've done it before. That's why I'm very proud to have a very diverse administration, where 45% of the administration are Black folks, 65% are women. There are clear forces that are intimidated by the love and the heat and the fire and the perspective that come from us. We have to remain firm and committed to ensure that posterity can look back at a moment and say this was a generation that not only allowed for our democracy to evolve, we do not surrender our humanity under any circumstances. Our ancestors didn't bow, bend, and break. You sure as hell better believe that we're not going to bend, bow, break either. God bless you all. God bless the greatest Christian city in the world, the city of Chicago. Act like I really know what I'm doing today. You all, we've said it before, you know, having dynamic leadership is special, particularly at a time like now. And I just hope that we can just show a little bit more appreciation for the leadership and the direction of this incredible, historic civil rights organization. You all put your hands together, and in the words of Steve Harvey, show your love for CEO Karen Freeman Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor, and let me just say thank you for not only being here, but thank you for standing up for those of us in this room and many who are not in this room, every day, all day. And that's not an easy job, and I'm not telling you something I heard about. I'm telling you something that I know. But even in a time where people really are attempting to talk about how different we are, you have emphasized how we just all want the same thing and an opportunity to achieve that. Well, good morning. Good morning. And welcome. First and foremost, let me thank Dr. Angela Jackson, Janae Livens, and Marina Light, and the Win-Win team. Please stand at this time so that we can not only thank you, but recognize you. Because having our policy summit, the Chicago Urban League's policy summit, as a part of the larger Win-Win Summit is really an example of what we need to do more of. So thank you for allowing us to have a real-life example of what it looks like when organizations with a like mind and a like mission work together. So thank you for that, and I know that your day, the entire day, is going to be great. I also want to thank my boss, in fact, all of my bosses, Dr. Suzette McKinney. I know that Gina Stewart is here from Wintrust. I know that David Nichols is here with EY. Tyrone Studemeyer, you will hear from him later with Hyatt, as well as Keisha Parker, one of our newest board members with ComEd. I want to thank what I know to be one of the most supportive boards, not just in the Urban League Network, but in all of Chicagoland, for not just showing up today, but showing up over and over and over again. I think Daniel Nello is also in the room. Thank you for your presence here and for the work you do on behalf of the league. I also want to thank our Chief Operating Officer, Calmetta Coleman. I want to thank our entire executive team who is here, as well as our development team, especially Melinda Nikitas, whose responsibility this is. Now, yesterday was Melinda's birthday, and she probably won't be talking to me the rest of the week because I just wreak havoc all week long, but she takes it in stride. But thank you, Melinda. Where is she? Thank you for everything that you do for us, but not just Melinda today. I want to thank Andre Page, Amari Jackson, Lionel Kimball, Michelle Kimback, Joshua Wiggins, and Stephanie Robinson, who all played a role in this year's State of Black Chicago, along with Calvetta and myself. And then I want to thank the entire Urban League team. Would all of you please stand at this time and be recognized? You know, I get to this is anything that I do by myself. In fact, I probably do the least work among this group. But thank you all for that. And then I want to thank our partners. We not only have our sponsors today, like ITW, Wintrust, Target, CVS Health, EY, and Shell, but we have partners throughout the room who partner with us in programming, who partner with us in our policy and advocacy, who partner with us in the mission that we work hard to fulfill every day, and but for that, we would not be able to do what we do. And then I talked about the mayor earlier. We have our alderman, Pat Dow, who is here, and she is the urban alderman, but we also have other members of the Chicago City Council and our city clerk, Anna Valencia. So I just want to thank all of you for being here and for being amazing partners to us. Now, you know, we're about to get another new alderman because we're about to open our place in Chatham. And that will be Ronnie Mosley, but our main ship, our flagship, as they say, will be in Bronzeville at 4510 South Michigan. So we are grateful for having two locations in order to do the work that we do. And so today, we are releasing the State of Black Chicago. And, you know, if we were inclined to be redundant or give the same news that we gave 2 years ago, we would simply do a data dump, and the headline on that data dump would be, not much has changed. In fact, last year we saw in the Color of Wealth survey and report that was done by Chicago Community Trust and JP Morgan Chase and a few other folks, but it was administered by the New School, that when you look at median black wealth, you see that whites in Chicagoland, white families, have essentially $210,000 of wealth. You see Puerto Rican families in Chicagoland have $41,000 in wealth. You see Mexican families in Chicagoland who have $20,000 in wealth. And then black families in this area, the median wealth is zero. Zero. Not $5,000, not $10,000, but zero. So now, if we wanted to simply do a report that recounted data like that, we could have saved you the trouble of getting up early and coming down here at 8 o'clock. So why did we ask you to come? We asked you to come because we wanted to talk about solutions. Everybody wants to talk about what's wrong, but we are here to talk about how to make it right. In the next few days, in addition to the State of Black Chicago, we will host a number of public and private convenings around a new strategic plan. And the overarching message of that plan is that as we convene people, as we advocate, as we program on behalf of our community, it has to have as the underpinning purpose to grow and develop wealth in our community. What do we mean by that? Well, the first thing that we'll talk about is the traditional aspect of wealth building that deals with entrepreneurship, the ability to not only start, but sustain, grow, have that business as a contributing aspect of community, and then most importantly, to have the option of passing that business down from generation to generation. Earlier, the mayor talked about the business ecosystem and the history that we have in Chicago. And so entrepreneurship is an aspect of wealth in the Black community. And in our report, you will see solutions that talk about how to make entrepreneurship a sustaining source of Black wealth. How do you do that? You do that through accelerator programs, like the Next One program that we have at the Urban League, like the Breed Love program that they have at the YWCA. But you also do it by ensuring that Black business owners have access to capital, access to customers, access to the networks that we know that can sustain and grow a business. When you want to do business, when you need a product, when you need a survey, who do you call? You call people that you know. We need to ensure that Black business owners have the same networks that other business owners have to allow them to sustain and grow the business. And so we talk about those opportunities in the state of Black Chicago this time. We also talk about workforce all day long here at the Win-Win Summit. They will talk about employers, but also employers who are responsive to the need of workers, but not just workers, career builders, to their families, because we know that a job is one thing, but a family-sustaining career is quite different. And so as we talk about the state of Black Chicago, we lift up those solutions that give us the opportunity to help Chicagoans develop family-sustaining careers. Careers in urban tech, like solar cells and installation. Careers in cybersecurity. Careers in developing gaming and in developing that industry. And yes, careers in the healthcare field and logistics. In those areas that are emerging, like AI. A lot of times when you talk to people, they say, I don't know about this AI. I don't know if I want to use it. Well, I hate to tell you, but you're using it every day. If you're Googling something, if you're using your iPhone with the Face ID, you're using AI. And so we want to make sure that not only are we using it, but that we are using it as career development and career opportunity. When we talk about financial wealth, we talk about home ownership. As far back in time as we can remember, there's always been this American dream of what? Owning your own home. But now here's what's happening. We suggest to our children that they go to school, that they achieve an education. They do that, and in many instances, what do? They have to amass debt. And then they go to look for a home, and what happens? They find that with the debt that they have accumulated and with the affordability of the housing, they can't achieve that American dream. We have a responsibility to make that dream achievable. And in this state of Black Chicago, we not only talk about the solutions that are ongoing, we offer a solution of our own. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. When we talk about financial wealth building, we also know that it is not just about home ownership, but it's about how do you develop those habits? How do you create those opportunities to ensure that people can save, that people can invest, that people will have the opportunity to use equity in their homes and in their savings to start businesses and to pass it on to the next generation. We also talk about it holistically. Tomorrow, I'll have an opportunity to go to Springfield with our Chicago State President, Z. Scott, and her team. And what we'll be talking about at that time is education. And we know that K-12 education is important, but we also know that access to college is also important. And the only way we can ensure access is to ensure that everyone has equitable funding in our state colleges. We want to make sure that Chicago State is just as well funded as the University of Illinois. And as we look at our partners, because we partner with the University of Illinois, we also know that the amount of funding that is available to our campuses, to our programs, to our curricula is not always the same. So we're going down tomorrow to talk about equitable funding in education because we know that that is a part of the holistic wealth. And despite the efforts to dismantle education, it still remains the thing that you can get to allow you to improve your life. And as many of our ancestors always reminded us, baby, get your education, because that's the one thing that people can't take away. We know that health is another aspect of holistic health, and that there are health conditions that disproportionately impact the Black community. Kidney disease and heart health, other aspects of our health. And so we talk about how do you eradicate those disparities, and we do that through not only health education, but we do that through the elimination of food deserts. We do that through making sure that we are a part of clinical trials, and we do that by making sure that our environment, because so much of our health is created by the environmental challenges, that we face. And then no conversation about health or about wealth can be had without talking about leadership and civic engagement. If you want to ensure wealth, you have to make sure that you are voicing your concerns about policy. If you want to ensure wealth, you have to make sure that your leaders are focused on the same thing. And if you want to ensure wealth, we all have to be civically engaged. It goes beyond voting. It means that you go to the council meeting. It means that you go to Cook County. It means that you go to Springfield and make your concerns known so that they are advocating on your behalf. And then we have to talk about criminal justice. We have to talk about it from the perspective of those like my friend Duke Tanner, who's here today, who has been released from prison, who is doing different things and contributing to the community. But we also have to talk about it from the perspective of those who have concerns about community safety and what it means for them as members of the community and homeowners. And let me just put you on notice today that that's not just the mayor's job. That's not just the police superintendent's job. It is all of our jobs to ensure a safer community, and there's a role for each of us to play. Today, as we talk about wealth, we will announce 2 new partnerships. The first is around growing the number of Black homeowners. We talked about the ability to attain home ownership as a part of our wealth building strategy as families, as individuals. We are pleased to announce a new partnership with Ani Realty, with Connects Modular Homes, and with the Chicago Urban League, where we are looking to put people in modular homes throughout this city. Not only will we, through this partnership, be able to find sites, and with the help of the members of the council and the mayor's office, but we will build those homes in a period of 90 days, ensure financing, and allow people to live in brand new homes. I want the Ani and the next partners to stand at this time, please. We're excited to partner with Scott Shaw, Adrian Muhammad, and Latala McGee as we go forward in that partnership. The next thing that we'll partner with and announce today is a partnership with Edward Jones and the Credit Academy. And that is to digitize financial education, financial literacy on an app that the Credit Academy has developed so that adults will be able to be incentivized by financial institutions to gain financial, improve their financial literacy, not just for their own sakes, but for the purpose of using that as a proxy for future financing. We are so excited about this app and this partnership because we believe that it represents future opportunities to again create and grow wealth in our community. Evan Leapart is here from Credit Academy, and I'd ask him to stand at this time. When we thought about how we would present to you the state of Black Chicago, we did not want to do in past years and focus more on the disparities and the concerns that we have about the data. We wanted to really talk about collaborative solutions that are happening and could happen. And there are examples of those solutions all over the city. Whether you look to the Civic Committee as they work through their public safety task force or their business diversity efforts, or whether you look at the corporate coalition who are creating opportunities of their own, or whether you think about the hard housing partnership, the 3C partnership that is created through the Chicago Community Trust, or whether you think about the partners and the support that we get from many of our partners like Verizon and others who are in the room. What I will tell you as we look to improve the state of Black Chicago is that no one sector, no one person can do it on its own. About 4 years ago, the Chicago Urban League had the opportunity to work very closely with ComEd, who's represented here today, to develop the solar sales and installation program. Every 4 or 5 months, we're able to graduate people from that program. Those graduates don't just have a certificate, but as one graduate put it, they have a pathway to improve the future status of their families. That's why we're here today. That's why we want to talk about solutions on the panel that you will hear from now. And that is why your partnership, not just today, but as we think about the future of our community, not just the Black community, but our community as a whole, is important. Thank you for your presence, but more importantly, thank you for everything that you do to contribute to our community. At this time, I have the tremendous pleasure of introducing someone who is a new friend to the league, but a longtime friend of the Black community and the effort to really achieve and grow wealth. And that is Dietrich Asante Muhammad. He is a scholar, he is a visionary, and he is the leader and a relatively new leader at the Joint Center of Law and Politics, but a longtime advocate on behalf of the Black community nationally. And we are so happy to have him come today and really talk about what the state of the Black community is globally and how Chicago fits into that context. Please welcome him to the stage.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Just up a little bit. Set my clock here because I can go on too long and make sure I don't go too long. Well, thank you all very much for coming out today. Thank you to Chicago Urban League. It's been quite a while since I've been in Chicago talking about race and economics. In 2016, I worked at an organization that's now called Prosperity Now, and we did a report of racial wealth divide in Chicago. I've been doing racial wealth divide work for 20 years, and at that time in 2016, there wasn't much out there about what racial wealth inequality looks like at the local level. So it's very exciting to see that organizations like the New School and Derek Hamilton are putting out reports, and that the National Urban League, or the Chicago Urban League, is leading reports every year on not just the problems, but also the solutions. And one of the things I noted in the conversation put forward by your president was the need for financial literacy. And I do think it's essential. One essential component of financial literacy that's often left out is understanding race and the political economy. It's important to learn how your checkbook, it's important to balance your checkbook, these types of things, how to buy homes, but it's also important to understand why does there seem to be so many barriers for me and my family to move forward. If you don't understand that, you think the problem is you versus the structural problems you have to overcome as you move yourself forward. So I'm going to talk, my expertise is not Chicago, that is the Chicago Urban Leagues. My expertise is more the national stage, and I'm going to see an old friend here from college. Wow, I haven't seen you in about 25 years. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nationwide, the Black political economy, and how organizations like Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, America's Black think tank, is working to help create a national climate that allows for greater progress in great cities like Chicago. So let's go to the next slide. What am I supposed to do? I see you have a button here. Okay, there you go. Is it okay if I just ask you? All right, great. So for people who aren't familiar, the Joint Center for Political Economic Studies, America's Black think tank, provides compelling and actionable policy solutions to eradicate persistent and evolving barriers to the full freedom of Black people in America. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll just highlight a bit of the history of the Joint Center. The Joint Center was created in 1970, 5 years after the Voting Rights Act. When the Joint Center was first created, I guess in 1965, there was 100 or so Black elected officials across the country. By 1970, we had around 1,500. And then, today we have over, 10,000 Black elected officials across the country. So there's a recognition that you don't just elect someone and then they magically know how everything works and can advance agendas. You have to create an infrastructure. And there wasn't a policy infrastructure for Black elected officials. So the Joint Center in its first 10 years, 1970 to 1980, worked on serving Black elected officials. We had a Black elected official handbook. That was a physical book at that time where people could find out, well, where are the Black elected officials all across the country. We did training. We helped create organizations like the National Black Association of Mayors, the National Black Association of State Legislators, even the National Association of Black Journalists, because we know, as former mayor and presidents point out, no one organization can do it. We need many organizations out there doing it. So Joint Center really helped create an infrastructure from 1970 to 1980. And then from 1980, we took on more role as a national think tank, putting forth ideas that can help guide the advocacy. So let's go to the next slide. What is the state of political and economic power for African Americans in 2025? In very simply, in one sentence, I was reading here, it is a time of unprecedented political and economic strength, yet still widespread asset poverty and weak representation. at the state executive level, the federal executive level, and Senate representation. The volatile political movements and changes in economic policy also raise many reasons to be greatly concerned. So let's go to the next slide and just note that, again, I talk about race and political economy because too often times I think people confuse race and racial inequality with personal prejudice, right? And that's really more of a result. I always think the foundation of racial inequality is racial economic inequality, right? It wasn't that just Western Europeans didn't get along well with West Africans, right? It was that Western Europeans had conquered a land and wanted a cheap way of working that land. And so that creates bad relations, right? You start to have good relations with Native Americans when you're taking their land, right? So that's the basis of racial inequality. And this is not something new. Some people say, it used to be the civil rights movements, and now it's the civil rights movement. But like Dr. King, and people before Dr. King understood the foundation of economic inequality. He died as he was trying to organize the Poor People's Campaign. Let's go to the next slide. There was a thing called the Goals of the Freedom Budget in 1965. Actually, we're having one of the most important budget discussions that we've had in quite a while in 2025. And Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph all recognize that a budget isn't just numbers. It's a moral document. It also, provides a direction of the country. And they created a budget of what it would take in 1965 to bridge racial economic inequality, particularly for African Americans. They focused on issues like full employment, modern health services, equitable tax and money policies. And we're about to have one of the most important tax policy conversations. You can't talk about wealth without talking about tax policy, right? Because tax policy is the greatest redistributor of wealth that happens in policy. And the challenge has been that we've been redistributing wealth to the wealthy and has been increasing wealth inequality for decades. So we're going to have to, have to turn the tables on that if we really want to address some of these issues. So let's go to the next slide. Just highlight, I'll get a little bit more into this, but just noting overall total wealth without durable goods, a little dated information. But African Americans have about $4.7 trillion, which sounds like a lot of money, is a lot of money. But if we had our demographic, share, if we had our 14%, we would have around $15 trillion, right? So the work that Chicago is doing is what is Chicago going to do to help move forward and getting that extra $10, $11 trillion, right? Because you can't just say we're all equal and then we have radically different living conditions and we're in deep asset poverty. Equality also has to be a material reality, not just a kind of an emotional, aspirational desire. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, great. So again, highlighting, the problem and the progress, right? Some of the challenges we've had is, there's been great change in this country over the last 60 years. But in economics is one of the biggest lagging indicators, right? One of the biggest lagging spaces for positive change, right? In 1967, African Americans had 58 cents on every dollar that whites made in terms of income. In 2021, African Americans had 62 cents, right? So all that time, desegregation, all of kind of personal prejudice, decrease, which I do believe happened, still only bridged income inequality by 4 cents. And at that rate, it would take 513 years to get income equality for blacks and whites. And I don't say that to be depressing, but I'm saying that to highlight the scale of the problem, which also means the scale of the solution, right? We have to have radical change in policies if we want to address this, unless we want to continue along around the centuries of path to one day having income inequality. And similarly, with wealth inequality, I'll just get down here. At the rate it would take from 1962 to 2019, it would take almost 800 years for blacks to receive wealth inequality. So again, we need radical solutions at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Let's go to the next slide. Let's skip this slide. Let's run out of time a bit. Now, I'm noting the challenge in bridging racial inequality, but I also did write a report with Dr. Algernon Austin for the Center on Economic Policy Research this past fall called The Best Black Economy in Generations and Why It Isn't Enough, okay? And, you looked at, because it's important to understand the progress that we have made. Between 1972 and 2022, the black unemployment averaged almost 12%. We had radically, it was standard for blacks to be in deep recessionary unemployment for most of my lifetime. But in 2023, we hit a record low of 5.5% unemployment. Joint Center does a monthly jobs numbers, and I believe the most recent was around 6.2% unemployment rate for African Americans, which is still a pretty historical low. So, I think it's important to recognize some of the progress and part of the strength we have right now. We also have seen, black income increase from a median 41,000 to 53,000 in 2022. Black poverty, it's amazing. In 1959, the black poverty rate is 55%, right? And then with the benefits of the civil rights movement, the war on poverty, in 11 years, it went down from 55% to 35% by 1970. That's real. If people say policy can't change things, that's a radical change right there. And then we saw black poverty rate stay above 30% until 1994. And the most recent data is black poverty rate. I think in 2023, we hit record low black poverty at 17.1%. I believe right now we're about 18%, but still pretty historical low for poverty rate. We need to cut that in half again. We need to get below 10%. But there has been progress. Progress can be made. And then, just note, and even in terms of wealth, there has been increases in wealth, particularly since the Great Recession. We saw record lows for black median wealth, and again, it all depends on how you measure wealth. Nationwide is around $45,000, though I understand the report came out highlighting. And you see this in cities oftentimes, because cities oftentimes have less home ownership than in rural or suburban areas, and so much of black wealth is in homes. So in cities oftentimes see much lower assets and wealth, even though they might have higher incomes, because there's stronger jobs. So he's got to kind of figure out that balance and mix. All right, let's go to the next slide. So, 2025, Trump in a height of black electoral power. Because the news is so dominated by, everything that President Trump says and everything that people say against President Trump, we think that's the only thing that happened in the November elections. But in the November elections, we also had historic representation of blacks, right? We had more blacks in the Senate than we've ever had before. We have more black mayors than we've ever had before. We have more black congresspeople than we've ever had before. So, it's important to not get too distracted and recognize what has been, that same election could, have a party that has very few high black officials in his administration, but also elect blacks nationwide, right? And so how do we build upon the positives of the most recent election? And yes, let me go to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. There's even some progress here. I think it's important, and we talk about entrepreneurship, that's a lot of things, right? That can be, you are incorporated as yourself, and you're working a job, and this can be, you have a business of 100, 200 people. So I think, we need to break that out a bit. This is a bit of numbers on non-employer businesses, meaning, and that is over 90% of black businesses, I think over 95% of black businesses are self-employed. No employees but the owner, but the creator. And you see in that African Americans are 13% of all non-employer businesses. We're about a demographic representation. So that, it is true that blacks have embraced entrepreneurship and are working hard in entrepreneurship. Now the challenge is our receipts are $86 billion, which is only 7% of all the revenue of non-employer businesses. So we have a demographic representation of number of businesses, but we're not bringing in the revenue that's necessary to actually have our demographic representation. So for non-employer businesses, that's a place for us to focus on. Let's go to the next slide and talk a bit about employer businesses. We see it's much more challenging. I'll just highlight two facts here, that only 3% of employer businesses are black owned, right? So that's where we're not near reaching our demographic representation. And we only have about 1% of the revenue of employer businesses. So again, that is an essential space for moving things forward and making entrepreneurship more successful for us. Let's go to the next slide. I won't go deep into this. This kind of highlights where black businesses are the strongest in places like Maryland, Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina, or at least the most have the most amount. And then areas of the economy. I think you're looking in the local city. You talk about black entrepreneurship. You talk about employer businesses, non-employer businesses. What sectors are black businesses most likely to be, right? And we know here that about 26% of black businesses nationwide are in healthcare and social assistance. Another about 14% are considered professional, scientific, and technical services. So having that type of analysis of how you can actually build black businesses. Let's go to the next slide. So, talking about the national political context, Trump's administration's radical initial action to remake government, Americans ready for the upcoming battles of the federal budget and tax policy raised the possibility that the recent positive steps forward in the black economy could be reversed. And just to say that in a less complicated way, I think the whole country is wondering about this. It's, there was an election, we're talking about making America great again, but there's concerns that these policies might lead us into a recession again, right? And if we get into a recession again, African Americans always suffer the longest in terms of recessionary policy, right? And so, we have to keep an eye, like right now, and again, I think it's this contrary moment. We're at actually strength in the black political economy, but we also have to, it's always at that high point that you start going to a down point, and you can sometimes lose more than you gained previously. So what are we doing at the state and local level to address those issues? Let's go to the next slide. And this, I'll just note that, I think one of the great concerns I have around a quote unquote attacking DEI is that one of the most essential parts to me is just making sure we have the numbers and we understand, what are the effects of trying to cut the federal workforce? Are blacks disproportionately losing their jobs? Is this having a disproportionate impact? I think, one challenge I do have is that there's so much of the kind of attack on DEI about this idea of we have to fight discrimination. And increasingly, there seems to be a tone that we have to fight discrimination against, I believe they were saying, white people, Christian evangelicals. And I'm kind of, well, it's interesting because when I'm talking about discrimination against blacks, I look at their income level and I say they have less income than other groups. Hey, they're in asset poverty. How do we address that problem? I don't just say, oh, blacks are being discriminated against, let's do something. I'm trying to address the quantitative problem. I don't see the quantitative problem that others are putting forward about we need to, increase, evangelical Christian income or wealth. Like, to my knowledge, they're not particularly in asset poverty. They're actually doing pretty well financially. So why are we cutting job programs for those that, we're seeing make slow progress? So, I think that's why it's so essential that we stay on top of and stay focused on the data and not just kind of on buzzwords and, things to get people riled up, but we're trying to address real socioeconomic issues. Let's go to, I think we're wrapping up here, let's go to another slide. So just Joint Center areas of concentration. I've only been president of Joint Center for the last year. As I mentioned, I've been focused on the racial wealth divide for the last 20 years. I've worked for Reverend Sharpton National Action Network, was head of NAACP's economic department, with the Institute for Policy Studies, and now I'm at Joint Center. And Joint Center's America's Black Think Tank has four main areas we've been focused on. I'll start from the bottom: government diversity, government representation, we're just finishing our analysis on, it's not just the elected officials, but the staff. There's so much power in the staff, and our blacks being represented at high staff level positions. We're finishing our report on the most recent Congress on that. Technology policy. I do think too, we get so distracted by our political battles. I want people to understand that in the next 5-10 years, we're probably going to have some of the strongest, most important technological innovations that are really going to change the job market. And how is it going to change the job market? It can change it in a positive way, it can change it in a negative way. And if we're not there in policy to discuss how we're going to regulate and how it's going to move forward, those aren't at the table, are oftentimes being served, right, as a meal. And so we have to worry about that. Workforce policy, we do a lot of deep work with workforce policy, particularly how predominantly black colleges can be better utilized to advance the workforce development. And then finally, this is the newest area, tax and wealth policy. And I'll just say again, President Trump has done more executive orders than any president ever. The last I saw was over 140 executive orders. I don't think people guess this, but he's done so much of his action just through executive authority. But the longer term power is in legislation. And this is where we're pivoting right now, as we're talking about the budget and we're talking about tax policy, which will have effects for the next 10 years to 20 years. And I guess also is, to me, a big concern about, it's surprising to me how much they're talking about cutting government spending, cutting government jobs, and raising tariffs, all things that could inch us forward to a recession, right? And so we really have to keep an eye on this and how it's going to affect our communities in general, in particular. Let's go to, as we wrap up, I had 4 lessons. This came from a op-ed I wrote about Trump's first 100 days, and it was interesting to me how much this was similar to the words you gave, Madam President, around what we must focus on, right? We have to understand, and that's something that I really appreciated being part of such a historic organization, is that people are overwhelmed. I can't believe we're losing things. And I was like, have you studied history? Like, there's never been a time where you don't take 2 steps forward and you're lucky if you take 1 step back. My mother was from Dothan, Alabama, and she talked about when it finally became illegal to segregate. What the city did is they took all of the chairs and benches out of all public places, so at least blacks and whites couldn't sit together for another 5-10 years, right? And so you have to, there's always that step forward, step back, right? And understanding that, and as I was looking at the history of the Joint Center and looking at the 1980s was a time of great regression, trying to take apart a lot of the civil rights policy institutions that were created in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There was an attack to get rid of the Department of Education, but it was during, and actually African Americans had very high levels of poverty and unemployment. But at that time was also a time when we really were building political power. As I'm sure Chicago knows, that was the time Jesse Jackson was running his campaign in 84 and 88, and with this you saw local elected officials all across the country being built. So even in times of regression, there's opportunities for building power and for advancement in other areas. And again, I think this is why it's so important to have great, local leaders, state leaders, because when things are moving at the federal policy, you can move things at the state and local policy, hopefully. That has to be a focus. The data research matter, I already said this coalition building is crucial. I'm very excited to be invited here today. I can't wait till the National Urban League State of Black America comes out. We were lucky to provide an article for that. We're working with the Congressional Black Coalition on a Black policy agenda. Really trying to work with organizations across the country. So we don't have to keep asking ourselves, what is the Black policy agenda? I do find that kind of crazy, that people create Black policy agendas every year, every 2 years, and then they throw them away and they start all over again, right? And we saw Project 2025, they didn't do that. The Project 2025 came from 1980, the Heritage Foundation. Started, and they just kept throwing it away. They built, they refined until they had their person in ready to really implement. And so that's what I'm hoping the World Joint Center can be. We're not going to be the lead advocates. We're not going to be the lead community organizations, but we can be a policy, whole policy that then can, that advocates and elected officials can utilize across the country when they're in power to actually move things forward. So I think I will stop there. I don't remember if I'm taking questions or not, but I will just take up the time and someone tell me what I'm supposed to do next. So thank you very much. Yes. So Madam President told me I could take 2 questions. So if there are any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, James Ball with the Sheriff Collective. When you were talking about wealth building, one of the things you mentioned is how in the Black community, home ownership becomes fundamental to how you build wealth and assets. But in this generation, especially the generation who would be purchasing homes, community-wise, that is not seen as an asset for us. That's not seen as a form of wealth building, especially because there's a lot of increase in challenges. So are there talks about...
So a lot of increase in what?
There's a lot of increase in challenges when it comes to financial equity, get access to where our homes can get. So is there any discussion in the center around that shift in just social compositioning of what we look at as wealth and how that can adjust or be moved forward for wealth building?
Yeah, so let me put forward, I do see home ownership continuing to be an essential space of wealth building. People say all the time, people don't really care about home ownership as much, these types of things. But I keep noticing that the white home ownership rate keeps going up. It keeps going up. Anything can get higher than 70%, 73%, 74%. So I will note that it is clear that people are creating families later, settling down later, and even the research I've done, I think Black first-time homeowners who are under 35 are more likely to become renters again than to maintain being homeowners. So I do think there needs to be an acknowledgement of looking at home ownership as more something, as an activity post-35. Now, you got to work toward that, right? You don't all of a sudden start trying to stay at 35, but understanding that is another stage of life and of wealth building at that space. I think there are some great ideas being put out there about building kind of wealth development programs. There's I won't get too technical here, but a lot of what happened with the New Deal and in the 50s and 60s was income security programs, right? Some income to help you with food, some subsidies for Medicare, some unemployment, these types of things. We did a great job to decrease poverty. But starting in the 1980s, there was a book called Asset Poor, I believe, that said we need to develop asset development programs, right? And Derek Hamilton, who is from the New School, who helped write the report in 2024 in Chicago, alongside Senator Garrity, has talked about baby bonds. And we're starting to see cities create baby bonds where every low-income child, it varies from city to city, gets some type of bond from the moment they're born that then can be kind of cashed in at 22, 25, it varies from city to city. So you actually have some wealth. Reverend Jesse Jackson used to say, it's incredibly challenging to be a capitalist with no capital, right? And so and that's what building wealth is. We have to create, how do we have, and I didn't get into this in my presentation, but that's the problem with asset poverty, is that your parents have asset poverty, that affects your asset development, right? Because oh great, you're the first one in your family to make a six-figure job, but it's not that you're making bad economic choices. You can't put all of that into a CD or invest in stocks because you're helping your aunt pay rent. And you should help your aunt pay rent, right? Your rent needs to be paid, but it's just you don't have, even if you have the same income as your white colleagues, you don't have the same amount of money to invest and develop. So we do have to figure out at the state, local, and federal level what type of asset development programs and how do we make home ownership. I think one thing I will note, there's been little to no bridging of home ownership inequality for the last 50, 60 years. So again, we need to do something radically different than just maintain the same program. This is one thing I do get concerned about, is people, we see some of the shifts happening and people taking away programs. That can be bad, but I can't just fight for what was keeping us at a rate of bridging wealth inequality in 800 years. I can't just fight for what was there, I gotta fight for something new. So I think I might get, I talk a lot, but maybe I can get one more question. Yes.
Good morning, how are you?
Good.
My name is Heather Wills. I'm the Deputy Director at the Workers Center for Racial Justice. We are a policy advocacy organization fighting for Black liberation in Illinois and Wisconsin. What I found often in my work is that when in spaces we have the overarching themes or categories of the policies we should fight for, but not the specific bill numbers or language to actually take to the desk of our electeds, whether it be at the city or or the state level or the federal level. My question is there already an existing resource where folks can tap into so that we can actually mobilize our communities outside of this space with specific language and scripts about what we should be holding our elected officials to actually do out of these categories?
And so let me put forward, because I'm not an expert in Illinois or Chicago, so I can't answer, what local resources there are on state policies, city policies. I will note, and this is why I was excited to come to the Point Center, is that this, like I mentioned before, this is a national problem. Is that we have advocacy groups that are trying to do research. We have very few research groups, and we just don't have that basic information of who is holding, who knows what local policies have had success in Stockton that maybe is helpful for a city like Chicago or Gary, Indiana, or what have you. So that is something Joint Center is starting. This is the very beginning phase. Was trying to create more of a database of federal, and then in 2026 we want to start getting more into city and state laws. So I know there's been some places where you have some local groups that are doing great work in cataloging, like city council policies, these types of things. But I would go to the Chicago Urban League and ask them what are the greatest resources at the local level. All right, well, thank you very much. I was very excited to be here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Calmetta Coleman. I'm Chief Operating Officer of the Chicago Urban League. Let's thank Diedrich again for that national. I'm going to be moving quickly in the interest of time, and thank you all for bearing with us, but I'm going to be leading a panel discussion on activating wealth building in Chicago. So if you could join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists, Deputy Mayor Kenya Merritt, who oversees business and neighborhood development in the city of Chicago, Sue Haley Davis, Vice President of Global Inclusion at McDonald's Corporation, and Tyrone Studemeyer, who is Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources for Hyatt Hotels Corp. and a member of the Chicago Urban League Board of Directors. Oh, before I start, I see that some of you already found the QR code. Sorry about that. I was keeping in mind that it was hot. I see that some of you have already found this card on your chairs that has a QR code that you can scan to ask questions. I saw a couple in there, and I think there are things that we will get to already during the panel discussion. So we're going to jump right in. It's a question for each of you. From your vantage point, what does it truly mean to build Black wealth in Chicago? And what is needed to move wealth building from just being a vision to reality? And what impact does the current climate play into your perspective? I'll start with you, Deputy Mayor.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank President Freeman Wilson for inviting me here today. Guys, she is truly an advocate for Black folks in Chicago. Well, some of y'all might not know, I worked with this woman during the pandemic. She works tirelessly on our behalf. There were nights where I would get emails at 2 o'clock in the morning with her working, trying to figure out how we get capital in the hands of small business owners during the pandemic. And I know that that same work ethic still rings true even post-pandemic. So in terms of, I guess the question was, how would I define
True wealth building. What
true
is
wealth
that?
building for me? I think I see it in 3 areas, and I'm just going to speak specifically to my role in the city. One, certainly, I think we covered earlier today, which is asset ownership and home ownership. But also with that, the equitable valuation of home ownership for Black folks. The second is jobs. But more specifically, when we think about the future of work, and I talked briefly with Dr. Jackson about this earlier, and I'm glad that they're doing amazing work around workforce and career pathways. When we think about our economies of the future, where Chicago is primed to grow in specific sectors, whether it's the blue economy, whether it's tech, whether it's the green economy, how are we preparing our young people to be able to capitalize off the growth of those areas? And then last is just vibrant neighborhoods. And so as we talked about health equity, community safety is so incredibly important in terms of how people feel in order to be able to generate wealth on their own.
Thank you for that. Should I repeat the question?
No, I'll chime in there and ditto to all of that, and I would say specifically to the part of how we do it. I think it is through what we're doing here today, which is strong collaboration between the nonprofit, the public, and the private sector to really focus on solutions-based initiatives that really drive that access to capital, that drive workforce development, and really help us focus on solutions-based approaches to economic mobility. And I guess I'll tackle, to not be redundant, the last part of your question, which is what about the current climate? How does that impact? You know, we've heard a lot about the challenges associated with the current climate. And yes, all of that is true. But I also think that it's at a time like this where the folks in this room can also work together to drive innovation. And I loved thematically, Dr. McKinney mentioned it, and also Mayor Karen, this concept of better together. And I think about our founder, Ray Kroc. He has a famous quote that says, "None of us is as good as all of us." And I think that's so important in this moment right now. So I'd like to challenge us really, right? Yes, it is a challenging moment, and we can do hard things, and we can do hard things together, and we can do hard things well, and we can do hard things for our people.
Each generation pays it forward for the next generation, and all of us have been products of education. Key to success is education. I educate my children under pretense when they graduate college and care for me in my retirement. That's my daughter's plan, and I see she can help me out here. But the reality is that it's beyond education, it's also training. So I think we have to understand as entrepreneurs, as we work with corporations, we have to understand how companies make money. At the end of the day, if you don't know just what Hyatt Beds and Beds isn't enough. You know, we buy everything. There is nothing we do not buy at Hyatt Hotel Corporation, period. We buy it all. I give a quick story of it, and the chart that you shared in your presentation was Baltimore has the largest black entrepreneurs in any place else in the United States. The scenario was an African-American female that sells bamboo toilet paper. Her toilet paper was so good till our guest was stealing the toilet paper off the carts, right? Really, I got video, I can't share it. One of my presentations, I'm gonna share it to suggest this toilet paper.
Some people may get caught in this room.
That's right, make all the videos, right? But the reality is we're working with her to grow her business, and it says, you're doing really, really well. We want to give you the region. Oh, Mr. Tyrone, I can't do the region. She says, wait now, girl. I've been fighting in corporate for you to get this job. You gotta help me out. She didn't have cash. It was the only part she didn't have cash. So it came back and says, okay, let me figure this out. Had a conversation. It came back and says, what if we paid you a year in advance? Right? She said, if you're gonna do that, absolutely. So we paid her a year in advance. We also looked at the problem that we learned from the Urban League program, with the entrepreneur program that we host every year, is a Project Next. It was time to pay. Net pay was an issue, and it is still an issue today. We took that from her experience and from the Project Next project at Hyatt, and we had a conversation with our CFO about changing net pay from net 60, Andy, to net 10. Game changer. Game changer. So if you don't want anything else today, take away from me, is go back to your organizations and have a conversation with your finance team about net pay. And mine was pretty simple, because I said to our leaders now, when people make reservations for a hotel, we ask for a credit card. And when they check into the hotel, we ask for the credit card to validate the payment. We don't say net 30 then, we say now. So why would that be any different with a vendor or a supplier supplying goods and products to our hotels? Some of this is very simple and very logical, but we have to be courageous enough to stand up and have these kinds of conversations for our people. Because that issue is solved for one, but it benefited every vendor within our system. So we've got to keep that in mind and say, what is it? I'm a half glass full guy, not a half glass empty, right? And we've got to figure that out. There is a difference between education and training. Bishop Archie Frazier told me, son, you train a dog, but you educate adults and humans. We've got to look at what education we hold. Black women hold more degrees than any other demographic on the planet, but yet they're still paid less than that of our white counterparts and have lesser jobs. You want something done and fixed? Now listen, I was raised by Ethel May Studemeyer, Carolyn Studemeyer is my mother, and I'm married to Valerie Beth Studemeyer, and Kennedy Joy Studemeyer is my father. My daughter. I'm surrounded by women. They shape my worldview. So I'm pro-women. You want something fixed, give it to a woman. Look at Karen.
Thank you, Tyrone. Kudos to the Hyatt for making that shift, which is beneficial to all the vendors, so that's great. Sue Haley, I love that you say that none of us is as good as all of us. And so part of what we're talking about today really is collaboration, and particularly cross-sector collaboration in terms of addressing a lot of the challenges and disparities that we see. I would just ask each of you, are there specific cross-sector collaborations that you're aware of that you think are great examples? And where there aren't any, what are some of the barriers to people collaborating across different industries?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. For me, a great example is the area that I grew up in. I grew up in North Lawndale. It's here for the West Side. And we're starting to see a lot of collaboration in terms of folks working across multiple sectors to invest and really transform that area. From corporate partners like the Will Group that's doing amazing work by choosing to have their manufacturing plant, shout out to ComEd, who has partnered with the Will Group to have their manufacturing plant in North Lawndale. to the faith-based community, Lawndale Christian Development Center, who has doubled down to make sure that we're maximizing our vacant lots by increasing home ownership, to philanthropy that's working in partnership with the city to do investment in our commercial corridors, to our education friends that making sure that folks have access to childcare. And so for me, that is a great example of how we're working across multiple sectors to ensure that people that live in that community have the resources that they need in order to thrive.
I love that. Similarly, I think in my world, we in 2023 launched an apprenticeship program with the City Colleges of Chicago, where we had employees, as students, we recruited employees from city colleges. They worked 25.5 hours so they'd be eligible for full benefits, working for us, training under our cybersecurity team as apprentices, learning all about cybersecurity while they spent the remainder of the week taking their course load at city colleges. And when they completed the program, they were able to have either an associate's degree or an advanced degree in apprenticeship, but also had working at McDonald's in their cybersecurity team on their resume. So whether or not they came internally to roles within McDonald's or went to other companies, you know, that work experience really helped create access to opportunity, which is, I think, the key to these programs. And basically, we have Chicago State in the room. We're similarly gearing up with a partnership with National Urban League that will allow us to work with Chicago State through their business executive program too. So I think, you know, the more that we can scale these types of programs and really change the trajectory and the opportunity that individuals have, I think we're moving in the right direction.
I think for corporations, we got to look at this, but from a D&I perspective, the workforce, the workplace, and the marketplace. Where's the talent coming from? Looking at what's available externally, what's available internally, promoting people appropriately, and then it's once they get to the workplace, how do we treat them? We do a good job of corporations going out and recruiting, come work for us, this is the best, you're the brightest, etc. Then we get them in and we treat them like mud. Right, that's a problem corporations have to dive deeper. And I think in that, one thing I think area for us to be very clear, it just goes around the gap in compensation, is that I don't think that we as a group, as a culture of people, know how to negotiate compensation. Every job that's offered, there is a low, a medium, and a high. We always given that first gram of this is what the job pays, you can't get no more, I ain't giving you no, and we black folks tell us that, by the way, who know that there's a medium and there's a high. So I think if we can help, we understand how to negotiate compensation, how to look at here's what I'm going to be offered the next 5 years, here's what I'm going to be in the next 5 years. Our white male counterparts do it like we're drinking water. So I think that's a piece of the workforce, how you treat people, how you show up, benefits, compensation, time off, all those things have to be making sure they're looking at it from an equitable and equality perspective. And then the marketplace, it's critical for corporations to partner with organizations such as higher institutions in Chicago State, partnering with Urban League, NAACP, Haraza, ASA. All these organizations are there to help us to grow, to retain, and to promote talent. So it's critical for us to partner with them and show that relationship. I had the honor and the privilege to work alongside Steve Scott when we did an MBA, Test to Learn an MBA executive program, where we took MBA students and paired with our executives at Hyatt, with our CFO, with our CEO, with our CMO, to give them that real practical experience on what it means to sit at a desk as a CFO and your stock is down. You've gone from a blue chip company down to non-investable. You know, those types of things, they have to hear that. So education is one part of that. Training is really important, that we're training people, giving them experience to be able to be successful. So all those partnership relationships, without them, we wouldn't be successful.
That is great.
Can I
Yes,
just add just really quick, and I think this goes back to like why we're here too, is the policy recommendations that were put forth. Like, it creates a roadmap. And so when we talk about collaboration and everyone coming to the table, I think what Mr. Settlemyer is getting at.
Tyrone Strumey's my dad.
Tyrone is getting at, and I think all of us have touched on this, is the collective will, right? Like what was presented earlier today in terms of some of the challenges that Black folks have are no different than what they were 60, 70 years ago. And so in terms of us moving the needle and working collaboratively, it's having the will and amassing, Andy and I were talking about this, the political power to be able to change and to shift.
if I could just go there too, in my book, Diversity Done Right, I talked about will versus skill. We have created a lot of skill sets and competencies. We lack the will to really fight for our own. And say, I definitely think someone's going to give it to us, or I've earned it, I'm not going to have this conversation, I'm not going to prove myself. You still got to prove yourself to compete with the global economy. My daughter speaks Mandarin today because in kindergarten, she was checking Andrew Jackson Language Academy, because I knew that by the time she gets in the marketplace, the #1 language will be Mandarin. So to set her for success, put her through that to make sure language, we got to do those types of things and look ahead. People are afraid of AI. I think like you said, who said something about AI today? That's critical. For us, we have hotels in China that's ran by all robots. There's not a human in the building. Right? So when we talk about being ahead, oftentimes we're late adapters. We need to be innovative, and we have innovators. American Airlines, Delta Airlines, and United are all looking for pilots. They have a mandatory retirement at 65. They need a minimum of 10,000 pilots. There's research that say that black and brown kids, because of learning computer games at an early age, do a simulation a lot better, do better as pilots. Well, there it is. You got the data, put it in place, and getting our kids to be pilots and working and look at the industry with itself is suffering. That's an opportunity to be a part of innovation, not a late adapter. That's partnership with United Airlines and American and Delta's now a partner with certain psychologists do aviation schools. That's partnership, and that's where we're going to leverage the most.
Yeah, and even in that, Tyrone, people still need to. So you've got black and brown kids who are playing video games, but nobody's telling them that this could actually lead to a career. That this is the same thing that you do when you're trying to fly a plane. Nobody's telling them that. And it also goes back to the real world example that you gave in terms of starting salary. Like I know when my first job was as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. When they offered me that measly $35,000, I didn't even know I could ask for more.
You was excited.
I was excited. And I had nobody to tell me, you know, you can ask for more. So.
But coming to that point, we noticed that we had a lot of earlier career talent coming into our space and just didn't understand how to navigate corporate America, right? If you're first gen, if you don't have that example. And so to the point about partnerships, we connected with a couple of our nonprofit partners to essentially come in and do a welcome to corporate America boot camp, right? This is what you should know about how to negotiate your salary. This is what you should know about in-office time. This is how you should read your cues. But really trying to pass that on so that we know how to navigate in these spaces that are increasingly complex and many times not necessarily built to serve us.
Another example, in 2017, under the leadership of Audrey Lee Williams, who was here in the room, we had a program called Rise High. This program was designed to look at youth between ages 16 and 24, qualifications, unemployment, and no education. So today, Audrey, I'm happy to say that we're just shy about, I guess, maybe 1,300 to get 10,000 by 2025. So job well done. Thank you for your leadership in that regard. But in that,
Stand up,
Audrey, just stand up, Audrey. You got this. Come on, give it up for Audrey. My partner in crime. Thank you, Audrey. When we looked at that, we had an African-American male. The guy was genius, smart, bright, about 6'5". Everybody loved him at the hotel. He gets his first paycheck, and he does not come back to work. Everybody's calling him, what happened to him? What's going on? What's happening? So on. And finally, he returned my call. He said, Mr. Tyrone, I could not work for a company that steals from me. I said, steal from you? He said, this guy named FICA. Well, FICA been stealing from me for almost 60 years. So, but he didn't. I say that in jest and fun, but the reality was he had no idea about taxes. Nobody in his home worked. Nobody understood that. Some of these are small things that someone said earlier, we take for granted because we sit in these seats and we got these comfortable jobs and we've learned how to negotiate, but just that little piece. I said, well, son, let me explain this to you, let me walk you through. He says, well, listen, he says, my mother is in prison. My grandmother is taking cancer treatment, chemo. I have 2 younger siblings. I make more money on the street than I make for Hyatt. Right? But the destination for that could be prison or death. Then what is your grandmother going to do and what is your siblings going to do? Right? So trying to meet him where he's at, trying to be there. So here's son, what I want you to do. I said, take my cell phone number, and if you ever get yourself in trouble, you call me. Those are the kinds of things we're going to have to step in the gap for our youth, to help them and show them a better way and a different way. I'm not looking for applause for me. We've got to do more than what we've done before. And then justice for one is justice for all. Those quotes that we live off by Maya Angelou, MLK, and Andy Young, all this, they were going through those issues. That's why those quotes came in place. It's up to us to activate and make sure we keep that alive. So those stories are real and they're there. North Lawndale partnership with us. African American male second chance program, gets a job at Park Hyatt, makes $10,000 in tips and is buying his first home. Not from his salary, from his tips. So you talk about he's got now a second home, he's got his own $10,000 down. I have a $10,000 and I got a good job. Not to say the doorman's not a good job. I don't want to say it's a great job. I wish somebody tipped me $10,000.
All right.
I digress.
So I want to ask you all, what is one bold or unconventional idea that you think needs greater attention, and specifically to scale the impact around Black economic equality?
Okay, I'll start again. So I have two, if that's okay.
More ideas, the better.
Yeah, so first is, so we talked about capital and access to capital and the lack thereof for Black folks. But during the pandemic, with my partner sitting over there, we put together a capital program that was specifically focused on small business owners of color. And that came and went away and certainly supported thousands of businesses. And so now in this day and age, I think about what role can government play, specifically local municipalities, in the capital space. Can we play a role in terms of supporting organizations like IFF or CDFIs to underwrite loans or capital where Black folks can get capital from traditional financial institutions? The second bold idea, I think, is kind of happening in the city already with some very creative economic development experts. And that's the role that we can play in supporting cooperative ownership. And so where you have communities of folks that are purchasing land, buying buildings, buying businesses, is that an opportunity for us to dip our toe in and hopefully expand? I think that's another opportunity to grow.
We have to be willing to work together.
We have to be willing to work together. There are a couple of models already in Chicago, but certainly that is an area where I think there is opportunity to grow.
Thank you for that. Suhaila?
Shouldn't be radical, but especially in this climate, it feels like it is. But if you think about the racial wealth gap, it is highly linked to student loan debt, and we know that Black and brown borrowers carry significantly higher balances. Eradication of student loan debt. Full stop, right? That in combination with then free good public education moving forward would be a game changer. I mean, it would really change lives. So it shouldn't be a big bold move, but I think
it shouldn't be radical, but it is.
Yeah.
We know that. Yeah.
I would say that private institutions need to make deposits in Black banks, in community banks, in local banks, to be able to give low interest rate loans to entrepreneurs who can't get it from the bigger banks. I think that's why it might be radical, but it's a smart thing. Taking $100 million put into a local community bank would make a huge difference in entrepreneurship. I think the other thing for me, the self-servicing, is hotel ownership. Being able to own your hotel is an amazing thing. So from McDonald's to Hyatt, we have what we own and operate, what we franchise. Having a franchise McDonald's or a franchise Hyatt hotel is actually another way. So we put a program together, ABCs for Hotel Ownership. We partnered with NABHOOD, which is National Association of African American Owner, Operators, and Developers. We partnered with She Has a Deal, which focuses on women who are buying hotels and then trying to help finance those hotels. We even have a solution now that Hyatt Place and Hyatt Park is actually is more reachable. We have a new project called Studios. Instead of having $100 million to buy a hotel, it's 50. So half of that. So getting to do things like that where we have ownership. And once you buy one hotel, it says you buy a second hotel, then the second hotel, you buy a third hotel, and then you have institutional wealth that you're handing down from generation to generation. And what we've both seen at McDonald's and Hyatt is that sometimes our children do not want to inherit McDonald's or hotel. That's a problem. And Pride because they saw their parents work 24 hours a day trying to keep that business alive, has chosen not to do the same thing. That's something we can change as well, but that's a great opportunity. McDonald's has a program in place on how to hire McDonald's and how successful that was. Had the privilege of working with Don Thompson when he was the CEO of McDonald's and the work that he did, and Pat Harris and the work he continues to do. And let's give it for Don Thompson, Liz. They just celebrated their 8th year anniversary for Chase. I want you all to go by and celebrate them. Andy Thompson, she is doing a remarkable job for black businesses. We have to support our own first.
Yeah, that right there. So, because Tyrone referenced McDonald's a number of times, so this next question is for you. How is McDonald's thinking about long-term investment in black communities, not just through internal inclusivity commitments, but also through sourcing, recruitment, franchisee development, social impact, and just what have you learned around that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's an acknowledgement and an understanding by the brand that we, as a fully, very heavily franchised brand, we operate in over 100 countries, thousands of communities, and if I think about here in the U.S. specifically, we're over 95% franchised. And so we do not achieve the level of success that we have if we don't represent the communities in which we operate, right? And so what I like to say is, we are successful not just because we're in every community, but because we're of every community. And so knowing that, we really have to focus on what it looks like to create and maintain that equal opportunity to succeed across our full system. And for us, that's looking at our employees, like you talked about. For our restaurant employees, that means ensuring that they have full access to achieve, if they're working and haven't gotten a high school diploma, they can get a full high school diploma. If they have had a high school diploma but want to go to college, that there is tuition assistance, not reimbursement, right? Assistance up front. And if you come into the restaurant and you don't speak English, we have English under the arches. So those things that will help improve your access to opportunity from an employee perspective, but really looking at the other parts. And we call it our three-legged stool, our employees, our franchisees, and our suppliers. And I love that metaphor because if one leg of the stool is a little off and a little short, it's not sustainable. And so it's the full success of our system that really enables us and drives our growth. And so for our franchisees, that means that we are, to Tyrone's point, intentionally seeking out, in this case, black franchisees to help power our system. That means that we're standing up a team, that we are standing up education, that we're talking about alternative sources of financing, that we're talking about access to capital, that team is being well-resourced and traveling around the country and meeting people where they're at, demystifying what it takes to come into our system and really telling it how it is. That we're engaging in partnerships like this. That our head of franchising, has the honor to sit on the board of the Urban League. So being really intentional about seeking out ways to ensure that our system is well representative of the communities in which we operate. And I can't talk about entrepreneurship without mentioning the National Black McDonald's Operator Organization that launched in 1972 and is the largest organization of black entrepreneurs. And so, and the strength that's in that system, they don't just advocate for themselves and their communities, they advocate for the future franchisees coming into the system. They provide mentorship. And because of the work of the franchising team, because of the work of the NBMOA, right now, today, our pipeline for future restaurant ownership is 73% diverse here in the U.S. Of that 73%, the percentage of people that are keys in hand, so what we call that, you've been through the whole program and you're ready to get a set of keys and open your own restaurant, 27% of that pipeline are black future owner operators. And so it's very intentional. Every act has to be very intentional and targeted and consistent, I think, to see the results.
That's great. Intentionality is critical. My timekeeper is flagging me, so I'm going to go to some of the questions that people have put into the system. This is a question from Ayana Simba. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Ayana asks, you all mentioned partnerships and mentorship for the corporate sector, but what about the same for policy and civic leadership? I'm looking at you, Deputy Mayor. But anyone who wants to speak to it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing. I couldn't agree with you more. And just a shout out to Kathy Patterson, who leads the Impact Program for Chicago Urban League. And so when we talk about opportunities for folks to grow as civic leaders, I think that is certainly an outstanding program where people can work across multiple sectors with folks that want to improve their city or improve their workplace. So I think there are certainly opportunities for people to plug into different organizations in Chicago. In terms of just like other mentorship around being civically engaged, one of the beautiful things about Chicago, from our corporate community to the public sector, I think everyone loves this city and want the very best for this city, so much so that folks get the tattoo of the flag on their bodies. And so I don't think that we're at a loss for folks just individually that would be willing to help and support for those that are looking for mentorship, that are looking to be civically engaged or are considering the public sector.
Thank you for that. This is another question I think might also go to you, Deputy Mayor. It's from Cy Lewis, but of course anyone can respond. Clean energy, mostly led by CBOs, CAA, and NPOs. The training is critical, but the resources are scarce. Where does city and state governments support this?
Yeah, so at the local level, we just relaunched the Department of Environment. We're very much laser focused on the green economy. From the regulatory standpoint to also the business aspect. So our partners at World Business Chicago, we're leaning in how we can support companies that are looking to grow in that specific sector. So for those that are interested, we certainly have resources and grant funding available for people that are thinking about entrepreneurship in that particular field.
Okay. Anybody else want to address that? Okay.
All you.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So I want to give each of you just a chance to say any last thing you want to say, specifically about the importance or any way that we can really enable building Black wealth here in the city of Chicago. So in maybe 90 seconds, each of you.
I would take real quick. Mary Green Black Women Expo is happening in the next couple of days. This is her 30-year anniversary.
Yes. Stand up, Mary.
Mary, is Mary here? 30 years she has been paving the space for minority-owned businesses, particularly women. She has over 400 vendors coming. Is it next week, Mary? I'm going to get it right?
August 1st to the 3rd.
August 1st. Well, that's pretty much next week. August the 1st. So those who have corporations, please make sure that you come and support, because there's going to be 400 entrepreneurs there with them, and some for their very first time displaying their products and their services. Go by and support, get your companies to go and buy for them. That's what it's going to take. She's providing access, she's providing training, she's providing vendors in different categories. This is how we're going to build wealth, and this is how we're going to support, by sharing with one another. So sorry if I embarrassed you, Mary, but I got to
Thank you.
I would say similarly, sharing. We have to fight any urge to gatekeep. This is a time for community. This is a time for the collective. This is a time to be each other's keeper. This is a time to support each other. This is a time to think about what it is that you have access to that you can do. We don't have to solve for it all, but each of us needs to think about what is the one thing that's within our control that we can do to help move this conversation forward.
I would just add that we're at a pivotal point, and I think that we're in a moment where it's incredibly important for us to step into advocacy and activism in terms of building Black political power. It's one of the things that talked about in his presentation, that despite what's happening at other levels of government, like we're starting to see just some growth in other areas, whether it's at the state level or at the local level. And so how do we amass political power to ensure that all of the things that we've listed in terms of the policy recommendations, that we can double down on them, lean into them, and actually get them done. But it's going to take collective power to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So actually, I just saw a question from the audience that kind of is a follow-on to that, and it is, well, it's more of a directive. This person says, They would love to hear thoughts on how to get this information to parents and CPS families, especially knowing the importance of early exposure and family influence. So, any ideas? It is, that's why I thought, let me ask that.
Yeah, I do love that question, and we talked about, the impact that we can make in terms of growing civically minded children, right, and leading with curiosity. So I don't have the answer, but as a CPS mom, I will mull that over a bit and maybe work on this team to think of some solutions. I know that we can each play an active role in our local schools in terms of who we bring in to speak, how we show up in the PTA and in different ways so that kids really see the examples of what it means to have grown-ups that are fully engaged civically and they grow up thinking there's no other way.
I think she said it.
Okay.
Not just at the time. But I would like to say though, each of us are given 24 hours today to do what we will. We can do something good or do nothing at all. In your next 24 hours, I encourage you to do something to be first kind to yourself and kind to others. Make a difference in someone else's life. Don't be selfish, don't be self-centered. Do something for somebody else. This is how the world is built. Our purpose really is to care for one another. Let's not leave anyone behind, and let's get behind this and be successful together.
Thank you for that. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage everyone. I think everybody should have at their seats also an executive summary of our State of Black Chicago report. It really is the short version. Please take a minute to read it. There's also a QR code on the back of it that will lead you to the full report. It is not a shorter version, but there is plenty just in the executive summary, and just really encourage each of you to act upon that. And then just join me in thanking our wonderful panel.
And our phenomenal moderator. This is our moderator.
And my president and CEO, Karen Freeman Wilson, will close us out.
Well, let's give it up again for our panelists, led by Mother Coleman, Kenya Merritt, Suhaili Davis, and the incomparable Tyrone.
Wow.
You know, I was thinking, and a lot of our panelists and speakers referenced the pandemic. And, 5 years ago, just a little over 5 years ago, we were all at work on March 12th, and then we weren't. Or we were at work on March 13th, and then on the 16th, we were not. That's when the city shut down, and we thought we were going to take a little vacation, and almost 6 months to a year later, we found ourselves back. And the thing that stuck out at the time when Kenya and I were trading emails at 1 in the morning, I was in a new job, so I didn't, I couldn't sleep. But the thing that stuck out was that we were all united. Even though there were some of us who, didn't like people telling us what to do, because that's just how we are. We did it because we wanted to live. And if you were, like I was, you were looking at the news and the poll of people who were sick on one side of the screen and the total of people who had died on the other side. And you were just trying to stay on the right side of the screen. And so whatever folks suggested, whatever new information came out, you were committed to doing that. And so here we are 5 years later. having gone through also in 2020 a recognition that the legacy of 400 years just didn't go away, and that we needed to do something different. And I often wonder, as we hear all of the rhetoric today, were we wrong in 2020? Or are we wrong now? Were you lying when you said that all of a sudden you saw the light?
Come on.
Or are you lying now? We know what the end is real, because we know what the truth is. And what we're simply saying by offering these solutions, pointing out solutions that are already underway, and suggesting that we all work together to develop new solutions to old problems, is that over the course of the last 400 years, there have been some people who have been dedicated, committed. My grandmother used to say, the devil is busy and good at his job. They have been good at their job in making certain folks and groups feel like second-class citizens. And it's worked in some instances. Well, we're suggesting that we need to be equally committed and dedicated to undoing the damage that has been done. Now, I don't care what you call it. You don't ever have to say diversity, equity, or inclusion again. And don't you dare say the R word. Reparations. We're not going to talk about that until 2029. But here's what we can agree on. We are all more alike than we are different. We all want our children to be well educated. We want their lives to be better than ours. We want to create a place where seniors can retire in dignity. And we want to be assured that those that we elect and who are appointed are truly working on our behalf. No matter how you call it, we all just want opportunity. And the best way for us to ensure that Black Chicago thrives, that Brown Chicago thrives, that all of Chicagoland thrives, is to do it together. So if you're a partner in any way of the Chicago Urban League, I want you to stand. Certainly thank you. If you're not standing, that means that we have to welcome you into the Urban League family. But the other thing I will tell you is that it is up to us And it's not just the league, it's not just our partners, it's all who want to see us live out the promise of our country, of opportunity for all. Thank you.